Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV. And you'll be pleased to know that Steve Mumbling has done one of his usuals. He's done one of his specials, which once again have compelled me, or inspired me, shall I say, to put photons onto celluloid. Yes, he's made another video which is directly sort of related to me, and it's called KGB UFO Files, ellipsis, PMSL. That says it all, really. It's quite a short one, actually. It's only 19 minutes. But he, I thought I would go into it a little bit because he brings up some interesting subjects. So let's start off. Now, to begin with, he begins by referring to something outside the usual subject matter of his video, because he does... the main subject matter of this video is like something else, but the first 2 minutes are kind of almost like a follow-on to a previous video he did. So I'll just I'll play that first. Okay, just to get over the. Let's go forward a bit. He does his usual copyright disclaimer.
Piffle peddlers, Ben Emlyn Jones, the other day.
Oh, hang on. Let's hear that again.
Right, so well, I was looking at one of our favourite piffle peddlers, Ben Emlyn Jones, the other day.
Oh, who's he talking about, I wonder? Piffle peddlers, eh? Well, let's just see, Steve, shall we? If I'm not peddling anything. Everything's for free. I don't even monetize my channel, so I don't know where you got that idea from. Secondly, if it's piffle, surely you'll be able to prove that it's piffle. Piffle must be proven. So let's see what you got, Steve.
I'm not going to include any clips of the video, but he was doing a review of Project Blue Book, which he seems to think is a documentary.
That's right. I mean, I've done 3 more episodes since. I don't think it's a documentary, Steve. I don't. Excuse me. Still got a bit of a lingering cough. I don't think it's a documentary. I think it's a very interesting piece of fiction which is inspired by reality. So it's a piece of allegorical fiction, which means it's made up, but it's based on real concepts.
And he was doing a review of part 2, and he mentioned something in part 1, and he didn't look very happy about the fact that they were sort of going down the path of there was one of these crazy conspiracy theories that what crashed at Roswell was actually some sort of Nazi vehicle that was full of deformed children that Dr. Mengele had been experimenting on, and that was the path they took. So,
well, I can't remember actually. I think that did come up in the 2-part, the part 1 and part 2 of the Roswell incident of the second season of Project Blue Book, and I did review that. I don't know about not being too happy. I think this is a theory. In fact, it can be traced back to what it was. Annie Jacobson mentions it in her book about Area 51, about how basically the Nazis did experiments on children. Indeed, they did. Joseph Mengele, who was their arch manipulator in chief, he made enormous advances because he had an infinite number of human subjects who didn't need to consent to experiment on, and well, there's lots of evidence that he was actually, after the war, he disappeared, and he was one of the Project Paperclip people who actually went to the United States, or maybe to the Soviet Union, or even Britain, under a fake identity. And there's several people, like Arizona Wilder, have talked about how he was involved in mind control and things like that, and up to his usual tricks, only he did it under a fake identity in the West after the war, or in the Soviet East.
The underlying theme, of course, of the Project Blue Book television series, the first 2 episodes, at least anyway, is that it's all the UFO part of it is all to cover up American high-tech aircraft.
No, it's not. I mean, this is something. I mean, the first 2 episodes of the second season of Project Blue Book are very complicated, and this is mentioned, this is brought up, and I actually deal with this in my review of those episodes, and it is hinted at, but then there's another hint that this is some kind of double bluff. I mean, it's very, very intricate, the way it was put together, the plot of those 2 episodes.
And it's got nothing whatsoever to do with aliens or UFOs.
Well, it is, you see, it's hinted after that it is actually something to do with UFOs, and the whole idea that it is all to do with secret aircraft, that in itself is a part of the cover-up.
And I think it's true that the CIA or whoever did used to infiltrate UFO groups, and the reason for that was that the Soviets apparently used to infiltrate UFO groups as well, because they could go along and have a look at air bases and all this sort of stuff, and they could see if they could spot any advanced American technology. Nothing whatsoever to do with aliens, and of course that's an ideal cover. You're just another UFO nut, you know.
I don't think that's the case, actually. Now, the idea that there was infiltration of UFO groups is absolutely correct. In fact, this is one of the recommendations of the Robertson panel. In fact, this actually came up in yesterday's video, because this was actually brought up at the end of the Project Blue Book episode 5. Same with Project Condign. I mean, I mentioned that, which is like a British equivalent, which is where when I went to the 2011 Bufora conference, they were talking about the MI5 officers and agents and various people who were actually joined Bufora and got involved. Now, the idea that this is somehow just all about secret aircraft and things is not true. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll go into this later in this video. I certainly tackle this in other videos. So it's actually, if anything, it's the actual concept itself is used to cover up the real research into what the government suspect are real extraterrestrials in the form of a double bluff. Anyway, carry on, Steve.
Now, one of the things that I thought I'd done a video on this before, but
oh god, you're losing track of your videos now. I am too. It's people who watch have a better memory than I do, I'll tell you.
One of the things Ben Emlyn-Jones talked about was the secret KGB files. It was a documentary that came out some time ago, and Roger Moore was in it.
That's right. Yes, it was. That's the secret KGB files. It's yeah, it was a very good one, actually. Now, what Steve is referring to here is a documentary called "The Secret KGB UFO Files." Now, it's not easy to find, actually. If you have to literally put those words in for it to appear on YouTube. But there are several versions of it on YouTube. Some are quite long, some are shorter. But it is an interesting. It is an interesting documentary, very interesting indeed. I think very significant. Although Steve's going to disagree with me, but. It was produced, I think, by the Learning Channel (TLC) in the early days of. I think it was produced in the late 90s, and it's presented by Roger Moore, who's the actor who played one of the actors who played James Bond. It's interesting, actually, because I thought they bring him in because this is essentially about spying and intelligence and things like that on the Cold War, which I think is actually quite interestingly ironic. Because, and I think what's just an aside, what's interesting about the James Bond stories is that James Bond is not a Cold Warrior, which is interesting because the original books were written in the early Cold War by Ian Fleming, who was of course involved in the Helen Duncan case, etc., etc. Don't want to go off in too much of a tangent here, but James Bond actually was generally, he would be after the bad guys in the James Bond film was some kind of criminal mastermind, usually with some kind of plan to destroy the world in various different ways, and very often you'll find that James Bond actually had to team up with a Russian intelligence officer, usually a blonde, leggy one, to put a stop to his dastardly plans. So it's interesting, that little bit there. But yeah, Roger Moore is very open-minded, I should point out. I mean, I've seen interviews with him where he talks candidly about his childhood. Sadly, he died in 2017, but he grew up in a haunted house. To put it in a single word, and he talks a lot about this. It's very, very interesting indeed. So this what this documentary does is it talks about the Russians. This is what happened in Russia during the Soviet era, during the Cold War, where it turns out that they had an interest in UFOs. In the same way that was in the West. The fact is though that the Soviet Union never discussed it at all. They never had anything like Project Grudge, Project Sign, or Project Blue Book. There was no. They did UFO research. In fact, Paul Stonehill, or Pavlov Stonehilov, or whatever his name is, Paul Stonehill. Just call it Paul Stonehill, mate. Yeah. He said it actually started under Stalin. So that's a long time ago. Stalin, was head of. Soviet Union from, I think, it was when Lenin died, I think, was it 1926 or whenever, when Lenin died, and he, right up to when he died in the 50s. And and he was the one who actually started it. But this research project was completely secret. Timothy Good actually talks about the enormous Soviet research project into UFOs, which is by far the biggest in the world. Yet there was no public face to it. There was no equivalent of Project Blue Book. It was all done covertly, never discussed in the media. Soviet media, of course, tightly controlled by the state. And indeed, there's this very interesting footage, gun camera footage, showing various discs, and indeed this giant cylinder. This was filmed from fighter jets and the MiGs, the famous Russian fighter jets, and you see like a giant cylinder, and several objects. There's two objects and they come together, and this is kind of like this is like the ATIP footage, but I think it's far more significant. And this was all kept secret until the end of the Cold War. So the fall of the Soviet Union was actually like the opening of a treasure chest in terms of ufology. The Soviet Union, the largest nation on Earth, covered 1/6 of the entire Earth's land surface. Of course you're going to get UFOs on it. Of course you are. You got like one, I say, massive country, huge, biggest in the world, third largest population on Earth. Of course you're going to get them. There's various interviews with KGB officers in silhouette, and there's a DIA officer, an American as well. He's interviewed in silhouette, and he talks about his own spying operations in Moscow and things like that. Very interesting indeed. But the central point of this, the central issue of this entire program, it covers a particular case. This is what Steve's going to refer to in great detail. Now, this happened, and an incident happened in 1969 at a place called Berezovsky. Now, this is near Yekaterinburg in Russia. You can find it on the map. It was reported that there was lights in the sky, followed by loud explosions, and the newspapers published a report that it was actually an explosion in a farm, in a grain silo, because one of the staff had not had broken some safety rules, and there had been a huge explosion, and he was ordered by the court to pay back the money of everything he lost. But that turns out that was some kind of cover story. This was in March 1969, and what basically happened was there was a UFO crash retrieval there, and in fact some documents that were purchased on the black market by the people involved in this TV program have the name of this. It's got everything. It's got a name here called Operation Sverdlovsk Midget, which sort of a giveaway. Sverdlovsk is actually it's the old Soviet word for Yekaterinburg, and midget is very interesting because this document not only mentions a crashed flying saucer, but organic remains. Now, the people involved in this, the ufologists who assisted in the making of this film, they bought the documents plus reels of tape, plus reels of film, basically on the black market. And how did they get that? How did they manage to get that? You can't go and buy CIA files on the black market. No, well, you may be able to, but very, very few. But the reason is because of the chaos that happened in Russia at the end of the Cold War. Mikhail Gorbachev became president, and he attempted essentially, he was a member of the Rockefeller Institute, and he attempted essentially to save the Soviet Union from collapse because the system was unsustainable. And he did this through his policies, which he called, became two of the most famous Russian words in the world: glasnost and perestroika. That means openness and restructuring, which meant basically he made the Soviet Union a more public country. He allowed travel and things like that. He allowed some freedom of the press. He allowed greater transparency with international relations. He also reformed the economy to include more private enterprise and things like that. So in a sense, this was a plan to save the Soviet Union by reforming it, and perhaps in the same way China was reformed from a socialist into a capitalist power. It didn't work. I think this wasn't planned by the Illuminati, actually. I think they did plan to have a new Soviet Union. It didn't work, and in December 92, the Soviet Union was dissolved. So in December 1991, the Soviet Union was dissolved. But when that happened, the KGB, the biggest, most successful and most feared intelligence agency on Earth, fell apart. This meant that the headquarters in a huge building in Moscow were basically everyone just walked out and left the doors open. So people went in there and they took the files. And these included top secret files on UFOs, things you could never get hold of any other way if it hadn't been for this upheaval in history. And these files ended up in the 1990s. There was a lot of chaos in Russia. Basically, organised criminals took over everything. Indeed, these people called the oligarchs, which includes Vladimir Putin. Although I think that's a long story. I think he's changed his tune since then. But there was Roman Abramovich who bought Chelsea. Things like people like that. They were basically ruling Russia, and all this stuff there was a massive black market. So anyone with the right price could get hold of a secret UFO file, and some people did purchase the details of this event that had happened in Yekaterinburg in 1969. And this was rumoured for a long time. I mean, the DIA guy in Silhouette, unidentified DIA officer, he said that he learnt through informants. I mean, he had many informants in Russia. He used to give them a bit of money and ask them for. They used to meet in pubs and things and just hand over. It's just like in the movies, just ask for information. They were talking about this, that the government knew about this UFO crash, the Soviet regime, and that basically they had the goods in there somewhere, and they weren't waiting for any particular time. It's exactly like in the West. In fact, Russia is generally very secret. It's always been a very secretive society. It still is. But the policies was remarkably similar. This is why I've always said that when it comes to UFOs, there is a global policy in place. When this thing came down near Berezovsky, the very same thing happened which happened at Roswell. The government sealed off the area. They put out a cover story about an explosion at a farm, and they got rid of the decisive physical evidence in this Operation Sverdlovsk midget. Now, where did they take it? Now, we interestingly, this particular documentary claims they know where at least some of the evidence was taken. So now there's several places in Russia which are the equivalent of Area 51. One of the most interesting is called Kapustin Yar. This is near Volgograd in southern Russia, and it is a secret rocket development center. And it's kind of like the place. It's like the place where things like this would be taken. It uses technical material and scientific support dating back to 1946, where German technology was taken there. They designed satellites, sounding rocket launchers, and all kinds of things like that. So a lot of the space program and missiles and things like that were actually developed there. Nuclear missiles, stuff like that. There's rumours there's a separate documentary which talks about Kapustin Yar and about how there is an underground facility there. There's no proof of this, that was there and still is there, which deals with UFOs, and it's known as Zitkur, which is actually named after a village nearby that was actually demolished because it was too close. Was a threat to security. Everyone was just moved out and it was demolished. Things you could do very easily in the Soviet Union. But that's Kapustin Yar. Just now Steve doesn't mention this. The documentary doesn't mention this, but I thought I would anyway. But that's basically what Steve. This is now he's coming on to the main subject of this particular video he's made.
And Ben seemed to think that this had some credibility. This KGB UFO files. He said they don't.
I seem to think it has some credibility. Does it not, Steve? Perhaps you could explain to me why it doesn't have credibility.
One up. Well, did they? You certainly don't see them digging one up in the documentary.
I may have used the word dig a UFO up. Obviously, maybe that's an oversimplification. But what you see in this footage, which was part of Operation Sverdlovsk Midget, this footage that came out, which is shown in this documentary, Steve's going to refer to, it's actually 4 cans of film with 4 reels in, with I think 1,800 feet of film. And what you see is what looks like an object, a disc, a flying saucer, classic flying saucer, probably about 15 feet across, and it's about a third of it is buried in the ground. So it's like sticking out the ground at an angle, leaning against some trees. Steve doesn't think it is a real flying saucer, and they explain why.
Now, I think the bit he's referring to is this. Now, let's just have a quick look at the actual documentary. I'll leave a link to this below so you can watch it in its entirety if you're missing your antipsychotic medication.
Interested in UFOs, then some
And that's George fast forward winding to here. There we go. This is where it gets interesting.
It is possible that more
That voice is Roger Moore, the actor who's narrating this particular documentary.
film shot, but this is all that we weigh.
As I've said in the past, it's, UFOs aren't going to come here and crash. That doesn't mean they're infallible. I've heard Ben say, at what point does the technology become infallible? Well, it doesn't. But it would be self-healing and all this sort of stuff. It would be seriously advanced technology. It's not going to crash, or critical systems are going to be duplicated. Even if you go back to Blake 7, which I think was shot in the 80s, I think the Liberator, their spacecraft, was self-repairing, wasn't it?
That's right. They had it's a great series, that Blake 7. I can make a dozen videos about that series. But yeah, it was brilliant. You can get them on YouTube now, I think. I've got the DVDs anyway. But Steve is speculating here, saying that about the workings of an extraterrestrial spacecraft, how it would operate and things like that, so therefore it couldn't crash. But he doesn't actually answer my question, when does technology become infallible? And he says it doesn't, so maybe there are conditions in which a UFO would crash. And even maybe we use the word crash, again, that's speculation. What if it's left there deliberately? What if for some reason it's been allowed to crash? Almost as if the UFO or the aliens behind it are doing some kind of test on us. I don't know. It's hard to if you try and anthropomorphize these creatures, you'll lose your head, because we're dealing with an alien intelligence. I think we just have to deal with effects and not try and speculate about behaviour or about motives, because the aliens, like as we've seen the evidence that has emerged from alien abductions, from sightings reports, from military reports and things like that, indicates that the extraterrestrials are diverse. They are many different species. They probably come from many different places. They exhibit a wide variety of behaviours, and they appear to have many different agendas. Now, one of those could include setting up this kind of scenario. We don't know. So, but the idea that it's self-healing and things like this, Steve, if I did that, if I used some kind of, if I used a 1970s science fiction series to promote my side of the argument, you'd be the first to pull me up on it, and you'd be right to. And so I'm pulling you up on it. You have no reason for using this as any form of evidence to promote your case. You are imagining what UFOs might be like. Well, anyone can imagine that. We can imagine they're full of green cheese. What counts is what we know, and we have to deal with that, I think, and stick to that.
It was always if it got damaged, it would self-repair itself.
Instead, the Liberator, this spaceship, did
UFOs,
that.
alien spacecraft are not going to come here and crash. It's nonsense.
Able to obtain. None of this film depicts the removal of the disc itself.
And that's because it's not a complete disc.
Oh, is it not? Oh,
I'll show you what I mean in a few minutes.
I'll just go forward slightly.
It's just it's thinking that they actually recovered some money for UFO. Done this, got some actors, and they've done this because they've heard that this of either some Russians have done this, got some actors, and they've done this because they've heard that these stupid Americans will pay a lot of money for UFO films. Actors,
hang on. So this is a setup. He's got actors to dress up as soldiers and KGB officers and people like that, and they've done this up. So Americans will pay lots of money for UFO films. Really, Steve? Is that so? That feels a bit. That seems a bit strange. That. Oh dear. Where do I think I'm going to cover this later because I go into it in more detail. But. No, that seems. Yep. This is. I think you go into this. Yeah, you go into more detail about this later. So I will. And where are we at? Yeah, so I'll let you carry on.
Or the Russians have thought they'd just have a bit of fun with the Americans and see if they could fool them into thinking that they actually recovered some alien technology.
They had a bit of fun. Do you think they have rubles to spend on having a bit of fun by making a film which they don't show? They keep it classified, which can't be cheap to make. I mean, we're looking at the sort of thing you'd have for like a quite high budget sci-fi movie here.
Technology. What it isn't, of course, is alien technology. It's
How do you know? You see, you'll come up with an alternative to the extraterrestrial hypothesis to explain this particular evidence. Yet your alternative really doesn't really say much, Steve.
It's just it's nonsense. It's very poorly done. If you look at it, this thing here, it's leaning up against some trees, and they've just scooped up. They just put a lot of debris, leaf debris, and what have you.
If you've actually seen it, it's like a big discus. It looks like it is literally a classic saucer. I'd say about 15 feet across. It appears to be buried in the ground. There's like a lump of snow and leaflet and dead leaves and things and earth around it, plus some smaller pieces of fragments which may be part of the craft. And it's leaning at like a 50-degree angle or so against some trees. Yet it looks as if it's a disc with some of it buried in the ground.
All along the bottom there to cover where the thing supposedly enters the ground.
It isn't. It actually does look like something sticking in the ground. It doesn't look like a prop that's been set up and then covered over. It doesn't look like that at all. It actually does look like something that's been buried in the ground. Whether it is or not is a question we're going to address. Steve has come up with something actually that I didn't spot, which he'll talk about later.
Where the thing supposedly enters the ground. Okay. So why not brush all this away and let us see all these jagged edges? You know, let's just have a bit of a look at that. We don't see any of that. This is.
Why would it be? I mean, it's possible it entered the ground and displaced the soil and earth cleanly. We've seen this happen before when they enter. People reports of them entering and leaving water. People like Bill Cooper, they enter and leave water without a splash. It's possible that they have a way of displacing solids and liquids around them smoothly and cleanly in a laminar way, which is not the case with the objects that we have.
This is a movie.
I know I'm speculating too, but one good speculation deserves another.
Type prop, leant against a tree, brush the scrub up against it. It's very obviously a fake.
It's not obviously a fake. It's Steve is going to present evidence which makes him believe it's a fake, and we'll deal with that when he does.
Zero serious analysis. It's like the stupid rubber alien, the alien interview. It's just nonsense.
Oh, right, now he's referring to the alien autopsy. Now, it's interesting that he does that because there's some interesting comparisons between this and the alien autopsy. I'm just going to go forward to about 6 minutes where there's another, he says something else of interest. Go for a bit more. Here we go.
Researchers believe the crash.
There's like what we have here is like a computer animated version of what might have happened. You see the craft come down, bounce along the ground, and then end up propped against a tree at the edge of some woods. I've tried to find it on Google Maps. Actually, I can't find the location on Google Maps. I've been around this place, Berezovsky. There's several clearings. There's lots of woods. There's several clearings. It could be any of these. I don't know, to be honest, where it is. I mean, the whole area might have changed in the intervening years. This was like over 50 years ago. Who knows what could have happened between now and then. Anyway, carry on, Steve. Where are we?
Have occurred.
Yeah, well, there'd be a bit of a trail of debris, wouldn't there?
Yeah.
We don't see any of that.
Yes, we do.
This is.
Yes, we do. I mean, in the animation, you see like a trail of debris left behind as this thing hits the ground and bits break off. Steve is saying we don't see any loose debris in the footage from which is presented. We do. We see loose debris surrounding the disc. We also see people carrying pieces of it away.
In the animation, this is an animation movement. They don't show they don't show that there's bits coming off it.
They do.
And, they don't show the Russian soldiers looking along that line.
They do. You see them. Well, you don't see them looking along the line, but this is something that might have been done earlier because when the footage begins, there's already troops surrounding the craft or the object. When the film begins, actually, with someone on a handheld camera on board a lorry with troops, a troop carrier. You can already see some soldiers in the area, and what's interesting is the unit. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but the unit that is has been identified. They have like winter jackets on because it's March now. Russia's a cold place. March, it's snow on the ground. They're wearing winter jackets, and they have like the woolly hats, those Russian deer stalkers, which you may be familiar with. And there's they have regimental patches on their arms, like all military uniforms do. This unit has been identified, and it is the very same unit that was requested in the Sverdlovsk documents. The KGB actually request assistance from a specific army unit, which is it's air defense troops. I think they specialize in this sort of thing, and that happens to be the unit which is actually in the footage, which is actually in the crash footage. Now, if it's fake, if it's just actors, they've gone to an awful lot of. First, they've gone to a lot of effort to produce something authentic that looks authentic. But secondly, it happens to be the very same unit which is later on mentioned in some documents which didn't emerge until the late 90s. Now that could be a coincidence, but unlikely when you consider the size of the Red Army and all the various different organisations within it. That I think needs some explanation, Steve. And they do, as I've said, they do have loose debris there. It's possible there was a search for loose debris along the line of where this thing came down, assuming that this animated reproduction is correct. And that was already done. And you do see people carrying small pieces of it away in the footage.
Looking around in here with metal detectors, maybe. Probably wouldn't be metal if it was an alien spacecraft. But
well, it might be. But the point is that that, as I said, that might have been done.
We don't see any of that, do we?
So
this is supposedly 1969. They probably would have thought it might have been made of metal. Why aren't they all looking around metal?
Well, maybe they did. I'll go forward. Okay, Steve goes forward.
Questions then become, where did the
I think I want to show you that.
Okay, go back a bit.
coming up next?
Okay, now there is something I want to show you that that I think fairly convincingly shows that it's a fake. So I'm just going to stop this clip here, and we'll go on to the next clip. Right, here we have one of our favourite old frauds, Stanton Friedman.
Don't speak ill of the dead, Steve. I mean, Stanton, I don't think he's a fraud. I think he's a great guy. He has passed away. Look, when James Randi kicks the bucket, I won't be nasty to. You've a right to criticise people even when they have died. Fair enough. I mean, I'll do the same with people when a skeptic dies, like James Randi or something. I'll do exactly the same. But I'm not going to be rude. Let's have a bit of respect for the departed, shall we, dear?
This is the same video.
Somebody had monitored
this is Stan being interviewed on this documentary.
Satellites, we had satellites, they had satellites at that time. Or just a report from a local person. And
okay, now I'll show you this in more detail in a minute. But what clearly gives this away is this. If you look here, there's a straight edge. Goes through 90 degrees there, and it comes up, and the straight edge goes in there.
Right. What Steve is referring to can be seen on, well, it's on one of the versions of this. There's several different versions of this documentary. The one he's referring to is called The Secret KGB UFO Files 1998, Roger Moore. It's 1 hour 11 minutes 42 seconds long. I mean, I downloaded a longer version of it. But you can see it at 41:28, as Steve has explained. Now, this is something I didn't spot, and Steve did. It appears that the disc, if that's what it is, appears there's like a break. There's a break in the disc, which is not quite. I mean, Steve is saying that Steve says it actually runs from the center. It doesn't. It runs slightly tangent to the center of the disc, but it appears to run along the ground level of where the disc enters the ground. This could indicate that it's not actually an entire disc buried in the ground. It is just like a prop, as Steve said, made of plaster cast or something, or made of cardboard, which is cut to look as if it is buried in the ground, and it's just placed on the ground, and it hasn't been covered up properly by all the dead leaves and snow. Now that is curious. It's a possibility. It could indicate that is the case. Steve obviously has concluded without a doubt that that's what it is. However, it could also indicate that somebody tried to cut the disc. Possibly they thought about cutting it in half at the scene, and maybe that may be an operation that's still in progress. They may have actually tried to cut through the material, cut off the part of the disc which is actually protruding from the ground, and salvage that separately before digging out the rest of it. It's possible that they abandoned this idea because possibly the material was so hard, the material was very tough. Often, like you see this with reports like Jesse Marcel and Jesse Marcel Jr., that the material that comes from these objects, these extraterrestrial objects, have unusual properties, and one of those is enormous tensile strength. So it's possible they started cutting away with an electric saw or something. After maybe it took them a couple of hours just to make the little crack that Steve's talking about, and then they gave up and they thought, it's just going to take so long, it's not worth it. They abandoned that project. They abandoned that particular salvage plan. They thought, let's just leave it now and just see what we can do. Maybe dig the whole thing up and actually salvage it in one piece. That is another possibility. Like I said, I don't know. It's more speculation, but Steve and I are both speculating here, and I don't see why his speculation should win as default just because it's non-ET. That's a usual skeptic fallacy. So carry on, Steve.
They brushed the debris up along there to cover the fact that this is just a sort of semicircular thing. They've knocked up, propped it up against some trees.
Well, why didn't they? I mean, why, if they've gone to this much effort to get actors in authentic uniforms with authentic weapons and tools and equipment, authentic vehicles, a very elaborately designed prop here, a cardboard or plastic crash UFO. After going to all that effort, obviously this is a very, very professionally made movie. If they're going to sell it to the Americans for a lot of money, which they didn't do actually, they didn't, but forget that. Why did they not think, oh my god, look, cover that bit up for goodness sake. I mean, it's something you wouldn't have to be Steven Spielberg to know. If I'd been faking it like this, I would have been very careful to make sure that the prop looked authentic, which means there were no bits of it sticking out that made it obvious that it was just like half a disc made to look like it was buried. And it's to actually do that, to actually achieve that effect is very easily. All you need to do is like get a spade or shovel or some other tool, or even kick it with your foot and just kick the leaf litter, kick the snow up to cover up that particular crack that Steve has spotted.
They've swept up some leaf debris or something like that to cover the point where it supposedly enters the ground.
Yeah, but why didn't they? Why didn't they on that particular place?
Supposedly serious investigators, would waste their time with this, analysing it.
Well, that's just. I could say anything. I could say, why do people, serious mathematicians, waste their time working out that 2 + 2 = 4? 2 + 2 = 5. We all know that. So why are they wasting their time trying to work out that 2 + 2 = 4? This kind of rhetoric is evidently useless. Yet you do this over and over again. I've noticed. You keep doing it, but it's meaningless. So I'm going to forward wind on to a whole minute now to the next point of interest, which you talk about. Here we go.
The ground. So there we are. So that's this is the UFO that I think Ben Emlyn Jones was talking about. The Russians dug one up.
Yes, it's
the Russians filmed a fake.
So sure, so sure.
Propped up against some trees because they'd heard the stupid Americans would pay a lot of money for such footage.
Right.
As for the alien autopsy part of it, I'll show you a bit of that as well. But that's
all right. Now this is interesting. He refers to an alien autopsy. Now we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. So is he, because there is a kind of alien autopsy film associated with this, which we'll talk about in a minute. But he says here the Americans, they're doing it because they want to sell it to the Americans for a lot of money. They know that gullible Americans will pay money for this. So after going to all this trouble, Steve, of making this film in 1969. Because that's when it was made. It was done on proper. We'll come to that one again in a minute, because you tackle this. It was done on proper film stock and things like that. Why did they never put it on the market? Why did they never put it on sale? Why did this not suddenly mysteriously emerge at some UFO conference? It was not put on sale until the late 90s, and it was put on sale by people who stole it. I mean, it's interesting you bring up the alien autopsy. I don't know if you're referring to the one that appears in this footage or the actual famous Santilli film. Now, it's interesting to compare this. I mean, I'll bring up the Santilli film again because there's a lot of interesting parallels we can bring here, and indeed, I think these parallels make it more likely, much more likely, that this Russian footage is real. So we'll let you carry on, Steve.
As well. Absolute bloody rubbish. Okay. That's what this is. That's the same
spin
thing.
on.
I just photographed it while the
you're still talking about that.
Wasn't really a serious investigator, was he? He was just a piffle peddler that made a living straight line.
What? Hang on.
4128. So why any serious investigators would... Well, mind you, Stanton Friedman wasn't really a serious investigator, was he? He was just a piffle peddler that...
Stanton Friedman, once again, you are smearing the memory of a man who's passed away. Whatever you agree with him or not, that's out of order. He wasn't firstly, if it's piffle, you can prove it's piffle. And peddling, right. How much money did he make from peddling this, Steve? How much money did Stanton Friedman make compared to what he would have made if he had carried on in his existing profession? Now, his existing profession was a top-level nuclear physicist, working in very, very senior positions for state and industry. Now, people in that position get paid a lot of money. It's you get a lot because you're highly skilled, you're highly educated, you're put into top-level jobs, and Stan was involved in nuclear power research and things like that. He would have made a lot of money from that, but he gave it up to do ufology. Richard Dolan as well, shortlisted for a Rhodes Scholarship. He was here in Oxford. I never met him, mind you. I was only a little kid when he was in Oxford, but shortlisted for a Rhodes Scholarship, studying political science here in Oxford University. Could have had a glowing tenured career in academia. He gave it up to do ufology, Steve. Right? What exactly are we peddling here compared to what we could do otherwise? I mean, it's something I suppose it's an argument you could say for me, because I suppose I've never been in a well-paid profession. I must admit that. I was a hospital porter, which is not well-paid. But again, you've got to ask yourself, what am I actually peddling? You could watch this video for free if you want. You have to buy one of my books, but then what am I supposed to? It costs money to produce my books. I worked hard to produce them. Am I supposed to give them away? We've had this discussion before. How come I have to pay for skeptic books, Steve? Why do I have to pay $11.99 for Richard Wiseman's Paranormality? Couldn't he just give it to me? He's not in this to make money. He's a good guy, isn't he? Richard Dawkins sold 6 million copies of The God Delusion. But anyone who writes a book challenging him, they're just out to make money, even if their books sell a fraction of that. You see this double standard here, Steve. And I'm going off on a rant now, and I'm going off topic. But to bring it back on the rails that we was on previously, you're being unfair to Stan, and not just disrespectful to his memory. You're being unfair to him as a person. It's an unfair criticism of him. You're quite entitled to criticise people, even people who dead. But you've got to prove it, Steve. You've got to prove it's piffle and prove someone is peddling it. And you've done neither with me or Stan Friedman or anyone else that you criticise.
Made a living out of convincing the gullible that there was something to the Roswell story.
That's not an argument. You see, that's the 2 + 2 = 5 thing again.
Was his claim to fame? Of course, there wasn't, as we all know.
Yes, there was.
Just let's run on a little bit.
The kicker is the fact that you get troops out there and a cameraman doesn't necessarily mean it's a flying saucer.
Oh, well done, Stanton. There we go. Yeah. He's trying to boost his credibility here by suggesting there may be some doubt.
Hang on a sec. That was Stanton Friedman you heard talking there. He's analysing this film, and he correctly says, "You see troops out there, you see things like that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a UFO." And then now Steve criticises him for that. He's trying to boost his credibility now. I think he's just being sensible, Steve. This, if he's now doing the correct thing by your standards and indeed mine, shouldn't you applaud him for that? So why is he just now trying to boost his credibility? He's being sensible. I didn't look at this and say, "Oh, it's aliens." I didn't do that. I thought it's an interesting piece of evidence. Let's look at it. you really do underestimate, or you really misrepresent how rational people on our side of the debate are.
That's what he's doing.
We need to be a little cautious about jumping to conclusions.
Correct.
Well, not really, because if you look at it carefully, you can see that it's a movie prop propped up against it.
Oh, so we come back to the movie prop thing again. So the point you're making, Steve, is that you are the sensible one for not being cautious and not jumping. You are jumping to conclusions here. You're jumping to conclusions based on the what I suppose I can't disprove your point, but if just because I can't disprove it doesn't mean it's not true. Anyway, we'll move on a little bit because 11:41. There we go. Okay, Steve. Then where are we now? Okay.
The tree. It doesn't bear.
You know, are the
Stan again.
uniforms
Stanton Friedman.
correct for the time frame?
Good to Stan. See, Stan is now asking, is it authentic? If it's constructed, I mean, if it's constructed, there will be errors. There are always errors in movies. Some anorak will always spot them. You've seen the videos. Oh, I saw this mistake in the Superman movie, etc., etc. All right, you get the same thing with this. Stan is asking, is it authentic? We see some men in uniform. Are the uniforms authentic? Remember, this is specifically timed to March of 1969. What did the Red Army wear in those days? What kind of weapons did they use? What kind of tools? What kind of procedures? Things like that.
Is the film actually made in the Soviet Union?
Well, if the film was a bit more convincing, then it would be worth that sort of level of research.
What? If the film was a bit more convincing, it would be worth that level of research. That doesn't make any sense, Steve. You're saying that somebody wants to research it to see if it is convincingly authentic, if it's convincing. You're saying, no, it's not worth researching because it's not convincing. Are we getting into a circular argument here, Steve? Is this a case of the super levitating prop, or is it props all the way down?
You know, is the film of the right age, the right sort of film?
Correct.
Are the uniforms correct? Are the vehicles correct? But when you actually watch the film, it becomes obvious very quickly that it does not bear any further research. It's
right. You don't approve of this. You don't approve of people analysing the film to try and get more information out of it. Because you don't think it's authentic anyway, and you think it's very obviously a prop. And for this reason, anyone doing any further research is wasting their time. That's your point, I think, Steve? Is that correct? I can't even begin to say how totally irrational that is. It's like the Planet of the Apes, where even when I was a little kid, I spotted this, where the paper dart, he screws it up and he says nonsense. He doesn't even try to throw it in the air to see if it flies. You're like him. You're like that ape. Except he's better looking.
It's a joke, really.
It's not a joke, Steve. It's
not
not a
really
joke.
well done. So, if he thinks this is good enough to go to that length, then he's either not very good at this, or he knows it's a fake, but he wants to take people's money to research it.
What? Well, first, Stan didn't make any money off this. He was a consultant for the movie. What's he going to make by proving it's a fake? Look, if I don't get it. Right, you are essentially doing a backflip here, and you're now displeased with Stan for doing the very thing that he didn't do originally, and now he's doing it, and you're still displeased with him, and by extension, you are with me too. We can't win, Steve, can we? We just can't win. Damned if we do, damned if we don't. Stan, the very first thing I'd want to do is I'd want to have the film looked at. Indeed, the film is looked at, it's examined. I'd want to do that. And if it turns out it's some kind of modern reconstruction using stuff from movie sets and stuff like that, then that'd be a good thing, wouldn't it, Steve? That's a good thing to do. If, however, it passes and it passes that particular test, and it turns out not to be a reconstruction, then what's wrong with that? What have we lost? I mean, how is that a bad thing? I really don't understand you, Steve. I really don't.
Suspect. Probably the latter, and then he can say at the end, "Oh well, yeah, I think it's a plywood."
Oh no!
frame
So
sort of-
you accuse Stan of thinking it's a fake? No, come off it. I've met Stanton Friedman. I actually spoke to him about this very subject. I interviewed him for my show. I think it's program 46. We didn't actually bring up the subject of the Russian case, but I did meet him a couple of years later in Holmfirth, and I do remember talking to him about it. He just wanted to know the truth. He wanted to know whether it was real or not. What's he got to gain from knowing it's fake and saying saying, okay, we want to have a look at this. We want to get this examined. If I knew it was fake, I'd be doing everything I could to prevent people seeing the original film stock, which of course is what. Sorry, Colin. Which is what the creators of the Alien Autopsy film did, the Santilli film. They deliberately avoided allowing the examination of the original film. So anyway,
But by that time, of course, he's taken 100 grand of other people's money.
what? He's taken 100 grand of other people's money? This is a specific allegation you're making, Steve. I mean, it's a good thing. Perhaps he's died, because if he was alive, he might sue you for saying this. 100 grand. 100 grand. How is Stanton Friedman going to make 100 grand any other way than sticking to his original career and being a nuclear physicist? He may well have made 100 grand doing that because, he'd have earned it, because he's a highly educated, highly trained expert, and he'd be employed at enormous cost to develop nuclear power and things like that for government and industry. But he gave that up to do ufology. What the hell are you talking about? They keep saying this over and over again, the skeptics. But think about the money they're making without even asking. What do they gain from it? What do people gain from this? What did John Mack gain? I mean, this is coming back to something Steve said earlier, and I've already made a film about this. Almost being kicked out of his job. Betty and Barney Hill, what did they gain from going public? It's all these people who say what they think about this. And the skeptics just say, "Oh, they're just doing it because they're just doing it as a money-making scam. It's a fraud." Well, there's easier ways to do it. There's easier ways to defraud people, Steve. It's very easy. I mean, you can sell dodgy double glazing. You can paint over rusty old cars and sell them second-hand. I mean, there's all kinds of very, very mundane things you can do, which will get you an awful lot of money. It really can. It's like Philip Klass. He accused. I mean, not Philip Klass. Sorry, it was the police who were investigating these guys in Arizona who were accused of murdering Travis Walton. And they said they made up the story about him being abducted by aliens. They were under suspicion of murder because they thought that these guys had conspired to kill him, and they hid his body in the woods. Well, if I was in their position, and I wanted to kill someone, I mean, would you say, "Oh, he got abducted by aliens"? No. You'd come up with something more mundane. You'd say, "Oh, a bear came at us and the bear dragged him away. We couldn't stop them. I'm sorry." Things like that. You're not making. This is where the skeptics show themselves to be far more outlandish in their ideas than anything any woo-woo could come up with. It really couldn't. Anyway, Steve, there's actually no need to play this bit. Where am I? Let's have a look. Well, there's no need to play this particular bit, because what the documentary do is they don't take Steve's advice. They take Stan's advice, and they get in a Russian film expert called Sergei Goncharov, and he examines the cans. He says the cans are what you'd expect. They've got the manufacturer's label on them. The manufacturer was a film manufacturer in the 60s in the Soviet Union. There's like stickers on them which are authentic. The leader tape, the leader reel, the leader footage of the frames at the beginning of the film. They also have KGB annotations on them, which are correct. The uniforms and equipment are correct. And as I've already said, the actual unit has been identified. The army unit, the air defense troops, have been identified, and they are exactly the unit that was requested by the people who wrote the KGB officers who wrote the Sverdlovsk Midget's documents. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about, I'm sure, Steve. I'm sure you'll dismiss that as a coincidence too. This film that was not sold to the Americans. It was sold to a TV company in 1998, which is getting on for like how many years? oh, 30, 40, 30 years after it was made. Oh, give me a break, man. Give me a break. Don't talk crap. It's interesting actually to compare. This is where Colin Woolford is gonna, his ears are gonna burn. But to compare this to the Alien Autopsy, it's the Ray Santilli film. Now, to be fair to Colin, it could be that the Santilli film is genuine. I'm open to the idea that that's a possibility. But in terms of evidential weight, firstly, the Santilli film, the actual footage has never been. The actual film is still in Volker Spielberg's safe, I believe. It's never actually been examined. Only videotape copies have been examined, and a little bit of leader film and stuff like that. Conversely, Sergei Goncharov has examined the actual footage, things like that. So, in a sense, this Russian UFO footage has passed the test that the Santilli film failed. So let's carry on. 12:52. I can't remember what Steve says here, but anyway, this is Sergei Goncharov just analysing the film. Here we go.
Film to, if you thought you were going to get a lot of money from the Americans for
Round of the film cans.
And this is the name of the factory.
Yeah, all this is meaningless.
Is it?
Because if you're going to make a film to, if you thought you were going to get a lot of money from the Americans for making a UFO film, you'd make sure it was shot on the right film stock. You'd probably make sure the uniforms were right. You'd probably make sure the vehicles were right.
Come on, Steve. You know very well that that's not necessary. You know very well that you can actually produce a hoax video, a hoax UFO video, which you can sell to people without getting all those details right. The Santilli film, I think, proves that such details, such authenticity is not necessary. Well, when, in your view, was this constructed? Was it contemporary? In which case, that would make sense because it has the contemporary film and things like that. If it was made later on, suppose it was made more recently, are you saying, therefore, they went back to some museum and they got some old film out of some museum and they shot it on that to make it look older than it was, and they managed to get hold of some uniforms from an old museum and some old weapons and an old lorry from a disused rubbish dump or something? Which is it? In which case, if it was filmed in 1969, again, they didn't sell it to anyone. It was classified footage, so no one's making any money out of it. It's just sitting there. They created a fake UFO for no reason, and it wasn't actually leaked as disinformation ever. It was rumoured to exist by this DIA guy. He found out it was rumoured to exist, and this other KGB guy said the same. However, it didn't emerge until the Soviet Union, till more than 7 years after the Soviet Union collapsed, on the black market. Are you saying now that the more authentic the evidence is for this particular piece of footage, it's just more proof that it's a well-constructed hoax? I think that's what you're saying here, which again, it's a contradictory thing. It's an unfalsifiable hypothesis, Steve.
You'd also think they'd take a little bit more care with the filming. All right. Well, I think.
They did. I mean, as far as the kind of film, they did have two cameras. They had one on a tripod. They had another handheld. You actually see each other's cameras in the particular shot. These are all then spliced into a continuous narrative shot. You don't. The handheld camera at one point looks behind the UFO. You never see that footage, which is a shame. However, it's still, I think, very, very interesting indeed. As you point out, like we're now going to come on to the autopsy footage. Now, I'm not talking about the Santilli film here. I'm talking about some autopsy footage, which is a part of this collection that was acquired for this production. Okay, now we're going to go into this alien autopsy. Now, this is very interesting. This is a part of this documentary. After discussing the crash retrieval, it then goes on to discuss some alien autopsy footage, and this again fits in with the document Operation Sverdlovsk's Midget, because the document mentions firstly the crash disk and then organic remains of a small living being. What you also have is you have then footage of an alien autopsy, and it's very similar to the Santilli film, except it's in colour. There's a soundtrack where you hear people speaking in Russian, and there's a number of people around a slab, a mortuary slab in a laboratory, and you see on it a strange body. And I'll just Steve's now going to discuss this now. Okay.
Put this one to bed, I think.
Good luck.
Right, this is from the same video. As I said earlier or later,
He finds it funny, I think.
The first thing we notice, of course, is that video quality is very poor. It's all overexposed. Exactly the sort of thing you'd expect from someone peddling a fake.
Well, actually, that's not always the case. Sometimes video quality in fakes can be very good. In fact, well, I'll come on to this in a minute, but there's a document, there's like a news story. Steve doesn't mention this, but I will bring it up because it's relevant. Some of the fake UFO, and there's some very good fake alien autopsy footage around. And I'm not just talking about the Santilli film, which again is I must say the Santilli film is a remarkable piece of work. It's very well put together. They spent a lot of money producing something that looked very spectacular, and indeed there's many more like it. This is overexposed. It's not a good quality. It's what you'd expect from like it's a videotape recording. It's I think it is anyway. Is it a video film? Sorry, I'm not certain it's videotape, but it's a cine. It's like a cine camera maybe with a soundtrack. Anyway,
if this was a real alien, they would make sure that they captured every single detail.
It's you see like a group of people wearing white lab coats, 3 people, a woman and 2 men, standing around a mortuary slab where there's a strange creature on. Actually, it's a small creature. I'd have thought it'd be like the remains of a roast turkey that had just been eaten. It looks, you see like a rib cage. You see what distinctly looks like a rib cage. But then they talk about it. They talk about the procedure they're doing, and it's very obvious from their dialogue. I can't speak Russian. Assuming that the subtitles are accurate, that they're dealing with something unknown, some creature which they're not familiar with.
As well as they could, and that's not what they're doing here.
The individual seen here appear.
There's no close-ups.
Yes, there is. There's. I mean, Steve says this early in the film. Later on, there are close-ups of what they're doing.
You get detailed. If that was an alien, you get every single detail you could.
You do.
You get detailed close-ups. People have pointed out they're not wearing any protection.
All right, that's interesting. You say that now. Firstly, the details. You do actually have some shots here, which Steve hasn't seen yet. I got the feeling Steve again has only, like as with the alien interview, he's literally just found this video and switched on his camera. He hasn't watched it first. He hasn't made notes before doing his shoot, his own recording. He's just literally watching this. So he's seen the beginning of the alien autopsy, or he may just quickly flick through it. I mean, I don't think he's watched it in detail before, because he would see that there are actually close-ups. There are close-ups of what's been done. The handheld camera stands nearby, looking over the slab, focusing in on the body. And you see them like they're trying to cut through it, and they say, "Oh, it's very tough. Give me these big, more powerful snippers and things like this. The scissors don't work. I'll need a knife. I'll need a saw. Things like that." This doesn't include material that may not have been published. That's the question. But it isn't. It's not a good quality video or cine film, whatever it is. It could be 1960s videotape. It could be an old film anyway. But as for the fact there's no protective clothing, now Dr. Annette Ryan talks about this. She's another expert witness brought in. Now she is she's a pathologist who used to be she's an army pathologist, so she's familiar with military procedures when it comes to post-mortems and things like that. And she said that's often the case in Russia. She said that the Russians tend to be quite lax when it comes to things like protective clothing. For example, well, there's several reasons. Firstly, there could have been a toxicity screening done already on the body. And Stanford Friedman brings this up as well. They could have already done a toxicity screen and found out that there's nothing really dangerous about it. That work could have already been done. As with Steve makes this again a bad criticism of criticism of the crash retrieval footage, because it could be that they've already gathered up any loose debris. So that toxicity screening might have been done. Also, it could be simply the culture at the time and the generally rather lax attitude they had towards things like that. I mean, you see this with Chernobyl. You see, like, the people who actually went in to clean up Chernobyl were not wearing the same kind of protective clothing that you would get with, for example, if there was a similar nuclear accident in the West, indeed, like in places like Fukushima. So they're not covered. They're not wearing a mask. They're not wearing an all-over NBC suit. They are wearing rubber gloves, and they're wearing a lab coat. That's it. Interesting, you can see their faces of the people, which means they're not afraid of people knowing their identity. There could be several reasons for this. Firstly, the film was classified, and they knew that hardly anyone would see it anyway. That could be one reason. But that, to me, is I don't think that's a reason for thinking this is a hoax. I really don't, Stan. Of course, if they were wearing the big beekeeper suits like you saw with the Santilli film, you would say, "Oh, you see, they're just making it more authentic. That's proof that it's a fake." Can't win, Stan. Can't win. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Carry on.
Some sort of extraterrestrial biological example, you'd want to be wearing at least face masks, you would think.
Well, yeah, as I just explained, that's not the case.
These be forensic pathologists or biological research scientists. Speaking in Russian, they are seen inspecting the specimen, the leader of the procedure describing his actions and the measurements they are taking.
I do recommend watching this. I'll put a link in the description box, actually, to the actual film that we're talking. Well, one of the versions of the documentary we're talking about here. Make it easier for you, I think. So turn it over. It has two cavities, 6.4.5 centimeters. Just reading the subtitles here.
Well, they probably got some Russian animal and took a blow lamp to it. I suppose they could have fabricated the thing
Why would they do that?
with the 3 fingers, or 4 fingers.
No.
Okay, so yeah.
Okay, this is something Steve noticed and I didn't, actually. There's the main body, which has like a stump of a right arm, and next to that is what looks like a left arm, or maybe it's a right arm, but it's outside. It looks too big, I'd say, for the body, if it's proportioned as a human is proportioned. As Steve mentioned, it's very interesting that the hand is like not only very large, it has 4 fingers. Or it has maybe like 3 fingers and let's have a look at it. Hang on, it has what looks like 2 fingers and like maybe 2 opposable fingers. I don't know. It's not clear enough to tell, but it's not a human hand. Its fingers are very long. They're spindly. They have what looks like 4 joints in them, which is more than what a human finger has. Watch it and see for yourself.
So you got the what's it? 3 fingers and an opposing thumb, maybe, or 2 fingers here and 2 fingers there. But really, this is not. I don't know. It could be anything, couldn't it? I mean, it doesn't appear to be a joint there. It's not going to be a terribly flexible thing, is it?
Well, no, it doesn't appear to have a shoulder joint, which is odd, but that possibly is not visible in this footage. What you have is a rib cage. Well, look, it's a small creature. It has a small torso. You have like a rib cage, and the actual pathologists are removing organs from it. They're removing pieces of it, and they're saying you can actually, you can read it unless you could speak Russian, and you can hear them saying it. But they're saying things like, "I don't recognize this. I don't recognize this organ. This is an unknown organ," and they're cutting bits off of it correctly, as Dr. Annette Ryan said, and putting them into test tubes for analysis. The creature appears to have a very wide collarbone. This part of a human body, which you feel here, which is around your neck, it's called the collarbone. In this particular creature, there's a much wider aperture. It's like it's over here, so it's like massive. It does look, I mean, obviously when you look closely at it, you can see it's not. But the first thing I would say if I saw something like that is it's a turkey. It's a turkey carcass that's already been eaten. Which of course it's not. You can see clearly when it does look a bit like that. It seems to have an external rib cage, things like that. I should point out another few other things Steve doesn't mention which add to its authenticity. These are flash frames, which flash frames, what you get is when you press the button which starts the film rolling, and when you stop it again, it doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes you stop it rolling, but it keeps going on through inertia, so you get a few frames which you don't intend to. And during that time, people often move the camera elsewhere and things like that. And in this particular footage, there are some flash frames which show details that are not part of the footage. You see, for example, you see people in uniform, like in what looks like Russian military uniforms nearby. Now they're not included in the actual footage. They're not in it at all. They only appear in these flash frames, which it seems odd that someone concocting a fake would include details like that, which they had no intention of putting into their fake. It's added expense, added complexity. Why would they do that? Doesn't make sense. I must say, the haircuts of the people, of the pathologists, and I'd say especially there's a woman there that's like, she appears to occupy some kind of junior position, like a lab assistant. She doesn't appear in the, she appears to be just writing things down, but she has like blonde hair, which is, her haircut I would say is more 1980s, indeed the pathologist as well. That being said, this was behind the Iron Curtain in the Cold War. Who knows what fashions were like then. We know that Western culture had very little influence on the Soviet Union during the heart of the Cold War. Literally until Gorbachev came along, people didn't know what Coca-Cola was and things like that. The Soviet regime actually deliberately prevented people from having access to culture like that. But that Steve doesn't mention the flash frames, which would he then say that's more evidence that it's real? Anyway, well, that's more evidence it's like a hoax, or what would he say? Anyway, we'll go on, because Steve brings up the subject of X-ray, so we'll go on slightly.
Be more extensively examined.
Yeah, and another thing that occurred to me as well with these alien autopsy type fakes. You never ever see X-rays, do you?
No, we don't in this particular evidence package. This doesn't mean that X-rays don't exist. That doesn't mean none were taken. It's possible they've not actually been included in this particular evidence package.
They never say, okay, we've got this alien, and we're going to dissect it, but before we dissect it, what we're going to do is we're going to thoroughly X-ray it. So we can X-ray every piece of it, so we can see what the internal structures are like. Does it have bone? Some sort of equivalent to bones? Does it have a skeletal form? Is it an exoskeleton type arrangement?
But that is what was done.
That's
what's been done.
Of the hands and the feet and the torso, the thorax.
There are no hands. Well, there's one hand. I don't see any feet. It's just there's like a part of a torso and an arm. That's all, and a little stump of an arm. That's all we've got on it. I mean, in the foot, they try to, in the actual documentary, they try to reconstruct the body, but they have to fill in so much with their imagination. It's not really worth it. But the idea that there's no X-rays in this particular evidence package, which means that obviously this has to be fake. Again, that doesn't necessarily follow at all, Steve. That's a non sequitur.
Thorax, whatever you want to call it, and the head.
There's no head. Yeah.
We never ever see any X-rays, do we?
Well, we see nothing. We don't. The head is not there, which is disappointing. I must say, it's disappointing. It's very little here.
And I think that gives it away as well, because it would be a lot harder to make something up that you could X-ray and look convincing.
But again, the X-rays might exist, though, Steve.
Not convincing. I think this really could be anything, and the fact that there are no.
No, it couldn't be anything. It's obviously not a human body. It's not the body of any animal we know of. It's not the body of any kind of primate or anything else. You can hear the people saying themselves they don't recognise what they're dealing with.
There's not more than one cameraman. You'd certainly want to make sure that you captured this in great detail. So no,
hang on. Extra cameramen means more people who have to be briefed in. It's possible. I mean, I don't know. This was the Soviet Union. It was the 60s. Maybe they had different practices, maybe inadequate practices. But it's obviously highly classified.
more than one cameraman. There will be close-ups. The lighting would be correct. It wouldn't be all over the place. So I think it's very safe to put a line through this as being a fake.
I mean, it could be
It's
anything. Yeah,
rubbish.
it could be. We don't know what this is. It could be anything. But to say it's a fake, no, you can't conclude that, Steve. Honestly, you can't. He says, please hold it to the side.
There's not enough of it.
It's a shame there's not more of
Any
it.
sort of realistic information from it. They have to do that. Excuse me. That's why they have to have the model hand with the 4 fingers.
Oh, it's.
Because if that wasn't there, people would say, "Well, what's this? You know, what is this?" You know.
That doesn't make sense. So why not just create more of the original prop? I mean, they've obviously put together something very good here. It's obviously quite cleverly done. They could put together like a leg or something, and I don't see why the hand has to be there to add authenticity to another prop which is already very well constructed. I don't get that.
A duck, a pig, so it could be anything. Couldn't it?
It's not a duck. It's not a pig. No, it's not. It doesn't have the same anatomy. It's something. I'm not saying it's an alien,
Anyway,
but it's an alien.
I'm afraid I can't be bothered to edit the coughing out. So that's,
Oh, it wouldn't be the
that's
same
what I
if
have
you.
to
It
do.
would
Needless to say, this is another
destroy authenticity for you, Steve, if you did
fake
that.
UFO, another fake UFO production.
You don't know
This
that,
is from
Steve.
the,
You don't know that.
secret KGB UFO files. No such thing, of course. But
Yes, there
Indiana
is.
Seems to think this is real.
You
but
can
of course, it's not.
You can
It's
buy them on
just
the black
another
market.
lot of fabricated rubbish.
No, it's not, Steve. No, it's
Absolute
not.
rubbish.
No, it's
All
not.
right. Well, as always, thanks for watching. Maybe I'll.
Okay, that's the end of the video. All right, now let's see. That you've got Steve has concluded this is a fake, but he's concluded it's a fake on no grounds at all, none at all. He has no reason for thinking this. He has assumed it is, and essentially, I think he believes somehow his position wins by default because it's the non-ET explanation. And again, you get this. Skeptics come up with this all the time. I cover this fallacy in my skeptic video, which I won't put a link to in the description box. What we have, let's see what we have here. What we have is we have authentic footage from the 1960s showing what looks like a flying saucer embedded in the ground. This is classified footage that was never meant to go anywhere other than secret files to be used by people on a need-to-know basis within the Soviet regime. It was not designed to be sold to the Americans for a lot of money. It was not designed to be leaked to the Americans for any particular purpose. We have that. We also have the alien autopsy footage from a certain particular place in Russia, a Russian alien autopsy that is, again, as it's the cans are there with the film. It's been especially identified to the 1960s. We also have documentation from the KGB that was bought as part of this package, which talks about Operation Sverdlovsk Midget. There's long details about which describes a crashed disc-shaped object and organic remains of a living being. So we have those documents together with the footage, with the film footage. And Steve, you really think this doesn't deserve further study? You really think? You are in denial. You are totally in denial. You're going against all common sense here, Steve. You really are. Now, I'll come back to the issue, like several people have said, that there was a suspicion in the Cold War that both sides used suspected UFOs were secret technology. They saw things flying in the sky they couldn't explain, things with capabilities that no aircraft they knew of had, and the Russians, for example, thought this must be a secret American aircraft. Funnily, the Americans thought the same thing. They would say things like, are these secret Soviet aircraft? This has led to the rather fashionable idea that the whole UFO phenomenon was staged. That essentially it's a piece of modern mythology. It was created deliberately to launder these more mundane secret projects, spy planes and things like that. Well, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit. You're drawing people's attention towards something with the ultimate objective of deflecting it away, which is such a risky gambit. It's just ridiculous. And as I said, I think that very idea has been used as a double bluff. over the fact that the government were interested in UFOs, but they were interested in them as true unknowns, in other words, possible extraterrestrials. And we've seen this with the ATIP footage and what's come out about that. So some people claimed that this particular footage from the documentary, that is from Yekaterinburg, or from the nearby town, whose name I've forgotten, is part of Cold War disinformation. They wanted the Americans to believe that they had some kind of crash flying saucer because they'd heard about Roswell. Apparently Stalin was very interested in Roswell. It doesn't make sense because this was never leaked. It's also again, you have to ask, for what purpose would they want the Americans to think that, and what could they gain from it? I mean, if this is just science fiction, if this is just a fantasy believed in by loonies, why do they go to so much effort to, in a sense, encourage and create and maintain it? Doesn't make sense. Someone has claimed this is training footage. If so, why in the 1960s was the Red Army training with possible UFOs for UFO crash retrievals? Why? When it comes to UFO crash retrievals, you're not really going to learn skills you can apply to other things, are you? It's a very specialised field. So if it was training footage, it could only be training footage for real UFO crash retrievals. See, now it's interesting that they have an interview in this documentary, at least the version I've got, with someone called Pavel Plimchekov. Now he's an ex-KGB officer, and he was involved in this particular case. He wasn't actually there on the scene, he doesn't appear in the film, but he was there during this case. And he actually believed originally, when he first saw the footage and the evidence, that this was some kind of American or British aircraft. But he changed his mind because of the evidence, because he read the documents like the Sverdlovsk midget documents and things like that. So he actually had this idea that, UFOs are used to cover secret technology, things like that. But then he understood that wasn't the case. Of course, there are many, many unanswered questions here. I mean, there's this. I'm just going to read you this. Now, this is from the HuffPost. New twist in decades-old alien autopsy controversy. And it talks about this, and it has a little still here from the documentary KGB UFO Files. Now, interestingly, it talks about an alien autopsy. But the one it talks about is this ridiculous thing that came out with the voiceofrussia.com, which is fake. It's a rubber dummy. They don't show you, this particular document does not show you the same alien autopsy that's in the KGB UFO files. I don't know why that is. But it says here, a story is circulating around the internet that suggests Russia has known about alien civilizations for many decades. Is that the HuffPo voice? I don't know. Anyway, part of this fantastic tale involves a UFO that allegedly crashed in 1969 and was recovered by the Russian military. See image below, and there's a still from the footage. And the dead alien that was reportedly autopsied, and then they link you to this fake one. It's the one, I don't know if you're familiar with, it's the very small, you may have seen it, it's a very small alien, it's about the size of someone's hand, it looks like it looks a bit bony, and it is a fake, it's an obvious fake. So why are they linking to that and not the actual alien autopsy footage that's in the bloody documentary? If this scenario sounds familiar, it's probably because of the most fabled and legendary story of an alleged crashed UFO and subsequent autopsy of its alien crew, Roswell, New Mexico, 1947. Despite official explanations that it was a secret spy balloon, blah-de-blah-de-blah, the Roswell crash has kept the public enthralled for decades. Not to be outdone, the nearly identical story emerged from the Soviet Union about an unknown craft that crashed near the former district of Sverdlovsk in 1969. Maybe it's easier to pronounce Russia than Sverdlovsk. Well, Sverdlovsk is today called Yekaterinburg, which is quite easy to pronounce, so I don't see how that necessarily follows. But before we get all excited about the Soviet UFO autopsy story, it should be pointed out that it's not new. The twist in this story is why the Russian event is suddenly getting more media attention than it has in the past. Hang on a minute, when was this written? 2013. Alright, so this is 2013. So, yeah. Okay. The entire alleged incident was actually reported on the 1998 TNT special, The Secret KGB UFO Files, and hosted by a former James Bond actor, Roger Moore. The program showed startling film segments of the alleged UFO crash, as well as several minutes of the supposed autopsy of a dead alien. which is actually they deliberately link you to a fake one. Like I said, they link you to an autopsy which is known to be fake. In his 1998 review of the secret KGB UFO files, NBC News space consultant and rocket scientist James Oberg, James Oberg is a UFO skeptic, pointed out how a disclaimer at the beginning of the program said, "What you're about to see may or may not be true." Well, why not? In that the case, I think that's sensible, because it might not be. That's always a possibility, and obviously the producers want to protect themselves legally. At the end, Oberg writes, 2 screens full of warning messages were even more to the point. One paragraph read, "The producers disclaim and do not guarantee the accuracy and truthfulness of any of the documentation or materials that have been provided by any source. The materials and opinion presented on this program, including documents, film, photos, or video footage, come from the sources and are not the responsibility of the producers." What's wrong with that? I think that's sensible. I think that's they leaving the possibility that this is a hoax. They couldn't have been more explicit, Oberg goes on, in their announcement that the whole series of episodes about the recovery of a crash flying saucer in 1969 near Sverdlovsk and the subsequent autopsy was a made-up story with posed footage. Well, Oberg says, but if that's the case, well, where's the confessions? You know, all these other things I say about the alien interview. Where are the confessions? If it was just made up, if it's some kind of docudrama, wouldn't we know about it by now? We know that Ghost Watch was a docudrama. I mean, that's all come out. I mean, what's the problem? If indeed this was a stage hoax, this is the HuffPo voice again, why would the voice of Russia suddenly circulate the story again? Well, they're not circulating again. They're circulating a bloody piece of fake. Hang on. The voice of Russia includes references to unconfirmed reports that a UFO crashed or shot down near the city of, can't pronounce that, in 1989. Oh, that's a different case now. Okay, I'll leave it now because that's just a different case. But this whole thing here is some kind of muddle up. I mean, the fact that they knowingly, because they've obviously looked into this. They've obviously seen the documentary when they were writing this article. Whoever wrote it, who was Lee Spiegel. Oh, Lee Spiegel. Oh, right. I know him. I know. I've heard of him. Why did he or his publication, the Huffington Post, link to this very well-known fake alien autopsy? Now, this is. I'll just click on it. So obviously, you can't see it, but this is a completely. I don't know where a fake incident. Yeah, it's a tiny little dummy. It's made of rubber. It's sort of bony. It has a head. It has no arms, but it was created for an art project. Why not link to the real autopsy? There's only one reason I can think of. Either Lee Spiegel has really cocked up big time and not researched this properly. Or this is an element of this is some form of disinformation. This is to distract and confuse people away from the real footage, which incidentally is possibly why the alien autopsy, the Santilli film I'm talking about now, was streamlined on its way to publicity, and I've covered that on other videos. Anyway, the remaining question has to be, well, where is it? Where's the body? Where's the wreck? Good question. Where is it? So if the body exists, does it still exist today? Is it somewhere in some storage place? What about the wreckage? Is that in some Russian's hangar in Kapustin Yar or something? I mean, obviously the modern Russian government is not revealing this. As I said, this is all old Soviet stuff that was obtained through the black market. However, the laboratory has been identified. Now, this is the place where the alien autopsy was done. Has been identified. It was a room in what used to be called the Soviet All-Union Scientific Institute of Biology in Moscow. Today it's called the Moscow Medical Institute, and it's used for training medical students. And we know that because they went in there and they filmed in the room where it had taken place. You get the same coloured kind of PM slabs. This distinctive tiling on the floor. It's all visible in the Russian alien autopsy footage. What's more, they tried to identify the staff the people who did the autopsy, because of course you could see their faces very clearly, even though you don't see their names. And they found out something very strange. In March of 1969, according to the records at the Moscow Medical Institute, 3 pathologists died of a cerebral hemorrhage in the space of just a week. And this was timed precisely to a couple of weeks after this particular crash retrieval took place. Very strange, isn't it? Interestingly, they went to the pathology museum and they did some filmings of various specimens, and some of them looked a bit alien-like, but they weren't allowed to examine them. So the mystery remains. I mean, it's not been solved yet. I mean, whether it will be or not, I hope it will be. I mean, obviously, if it comes out that this was a real crash retrieval with real aliens, then this is disclosure with a capital D. And I've always said Russia is probably the most likely country to do this. I think it's probably more likely to do this than the United States. Even with Trump and the post-2016 world, I think Russia still probably would lead the way in something like that. I can't be certain, though. I cannot be certain that is the case, but that does appear likely. However, it remains to be seen. It could come out that this was some kind of docudrama, in which case it's amazing that we're going back how long now, over 20 years, and that's not been revealed already. I mean, in other sort of circumstances like that Stanley Kubrick thing about the moon landings, it all came out that was just faked. Everyone was just having a laugh, you know. This hasn't, for some reason, which is odd. But it's like with the alien interview, you know, what happened to all the "I fooled the world" memes? You know, people coming out and saying, you know, "Hey, guess what I did, mate? I fooled you all." we made up a fake documentary about finding a Russian crash retrieval footage. Seems that hasn't happened. I mean, Steve Mumbling needs to explain that. Either way, I think Steve Mumbling, as usual, he has really let himself go. I mean, this is probably the most outrageous video he's ever made. He's let himself go big time on trying to prove a case for which he has no reason to prove it. He simply just said it and not provided any kind of reasoning. It's kind of like he's tried to bootstrap this conclusion above all the evidence that he has presented, he himself has examined and presented. So that is my reply to Steve Mumbling. There'll be more to come, I'm sure. I've got plenty of other replies on the cards waiting. But in the meantime, thank you all of you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.